What is going on, movie fans? I want to first off start off by thanking each of you for checking out all the ranked videos we did of the Friday the 13th movies. We ended up doing 3 of those videos. We ranked the movies themselves, we ranked the quality of the Jason characters. We also ranked the final girls in each of those movies and wanted to now move over and start on the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Um, just watched all of these films, 9 of them, which include the 8 standalone films, the 7 standalone films, the Freddy vs. Jason film, as well as the 2010 reboot film. And we are going to start in this video. We're going to be ranking the films themselves. And there were 10 categories on how I was scoring each of these films. So I try to put a numeric value to each of the movies so that I could more clearly articulate where they were lining up in the ranking. So we looked at the quality of the story, the characters, and the characters are not only how the characters are written, but also the acting of the characters. Was the film scary? What were the kills like in it? The effects, the practical effects, special effects, the originality of the concept of this, the fun factor. And another way to think of fun factor, because some people might think, well, if it's a really terrifying movie, is that fun? Let's just look at the entertainment value of the movie, the quality of the final girl or final boy in the movie, the filming quality, so the cinematography of the film, and how good was Freddy in it. So those were the 10 categories I looked at, and each one I scored on a scale of 1 to 10 to come up with a numeric value for each of the movies. So we're going to rank this from the worst to the best. Now, what's interesting about the Nightmare on Elm Street series is it's kind of split down the middle, where half the films rank towards the bottom, and then all of a sudden you have a big jump in quality to the films that are ranked towards the top. So let's start with the worst of the worst, and we'll only get better from here. So at the bottom, the absolute worst was the reboot, the 2010 reboot, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Um, Here's what I struggled with in this movie, because there's not much to like about this movie. The first off is, for a movie about nightmares and dreaming, someone should have told the actors they probably shouldn't have been asleep actually during the filming of this movie. You had really great actors in this movie that delivered their worst performances respectively. There's not much difference in the story concept between the original 84 and the remake from 2010. They just changed the names. Rod became Jesse, Tina became Kristen, Glenn became Quentin, and they added in a little bit more of a depraved aspect to the story, and really kind of sullied what made Freddy unique, and that is Robert Englund. And I don't think anyone in that role could have lived up to the task and filled the shoes of Robert Englund in it. Um, there's not much to really compliment about this movie. The highest score it got in any of the categories was film quality, and that was a 3 out of 10. This was a very formulaic movie, and it was very difficult to get through. All right, moving one step up. We're just getting a little bit better. Freddy vs. Jason. So I had scored Freddy vs. Jason when I did the Friday the 13th movies. The only score I had to revise was I had to revise the ranking of Freddy in lieu of the ranking of Jason. And I said when we did the Friday the 13th series that Freddy vs. Jason is not a Friday the 13th movie. It's a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. The whole premise, the universe it exists in, is a nightmare universe. It doesn't really exist in the Friday the 13th, Camp Crystal Lake, Jason Voorhees universe. And the Jason character is so pathetically weak in that movie that he doesn't have anything other than he's a plot device in the movie for Freddy to enact his plan in the movie. That being said, it's not that great of a nightmare film either. The highest thing I can say about this is Freddy's fun in it, and that's about it. Um, So let's get better, please. Okay, let's move up. Number 7, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. Believe it or not, this was actually the first Friday the 13th movie I watched all the way through when I was a kid. It was on late night, probably Halloween weekend, and I watched it when my parents went to sleep. So I had a little bit of nostalgia reconnecting me to this movie, and I thought, oh, I remember kind of liking this movie. And I think I liked it when I was younger because it wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be. And it was a way for me to have a gateway into the slasher series without being too terrified as a young kid watching this movie for the first time. That being said, on the rewatch, boy, this movie really, really struggles. The reason overall that it struggles is it rips off the concept of you have a kind of ragtag band of misfit teenagers coming together to try to take on Freddy. Well, we saw that in Dream Warriors. We've been there before. So it didn't work as well. Also, really, really rough acting in this movie. It leaned too much into the comedy and pulled too far away from the horror element of the series. Uh, Probably the worst use of CGI in any of the Nightmare films. And the final girl played by Maggie, actually Billy Zane's sister, there's a weird fact for you, was so monotoned and plain. It was hard to root for her. I mean, the most interesting character in it is Freddy. You're not rooting for anyone else but him. This was such a difficult movie to watch on a rewatch. Even the fact that they had Tom Arnold and Roseanne Arnold in it as characters just shows like how much they had jumped the shark in this one. All right, let's move up. We're still not good. This was, oh, did I not enjoy watching this on the rewatch? Was part 5, which is The Dream Child. In this movie, they brought back the storyline or the arc of Freddy that they introduced in part 3 that they skipped over in part 4. They didn't really mention it, which is Freddy is the son of a nun who worked at this asylum, who was impregnated while working at this asylum. They brought back that storyline and really leaned into it, but all of a sudden they're kind of like reinventing how. To be clear, none of the movies are really clear about what Freddy needs to do to be killed versus what he needs to do to come back. They kind of retcon each other a lot, especially in 2, 3, 4, and 5. This one was just, it was all attempts at effects without really any quality in script, any quality in characters. You have the returning final girl from the 4th film, Alice, but all of a sudden Alice doesn't have an arc anymore that made her so pivotal in the 4th film, and they made her less interesting. I don't know how you took the same actress and the same character and made her less interesting. You really have to try to make it less interesting. Um, all the other characters were really dull. They had the child character Jacob, who was just, he was probably the creepiest element of that. Like I saw that and was like, this is gonna be your future child. I'm like, I need to make better decisions in life because this kid creeps me out. The Freddy makeup was actually worse than its predecessors, which is like, how are we getting worse as we're advancing in technology? It's just not that fun of a film to watch. And now this is kind of like our dividing line, which is we're starting to get a little bit better. And then after this film, we're going to jump up. We actually have some decent movies. This is probably like the top of the worst, which is Freddy's Revenge. Now, what's interesting is, if I would have scored these prior to rewatching, I probably would have put this right at the bottom. Like, oh, I did not like Freddy's Revenge. I didn't like watching it. And I'm probably not going to like rewatching it. But upon rewatching it, I was surprised at how much there was to appreciate in this movie. And I'll start with the fact that they tried something different, where every studio is rushing out to pump out sequel after sequel after sequel. I mean, Halloween has pumped out a few sequels at this point, and I think at this point they pivoted and released part three, which they tried to do the anthology. But Friday the 13th has certainly pumped out a few that were a little more formulaic in their approach. This was a nightmare saying we want to do something different, and let's take the idea that was presented in part one and let's evolve it. And the idea was, let's see if we can, if the premise is Freddy was destroyed in the first movie because people didn't believe in him, well, his only next logical step is to enter into the real world by possessing one of the characters. So the whole movie, it's kind of this: is Freddy killing these individuals, or is the lead character Jesse killing these individuals? Uh, there's really good characters in this movie. You know who the characters are, you know their motivations, you really get a sense of what their ethos is all about. But it's very clear that the filmmakers didn't know where they were actually going with this, because everything falls apart in Act 3. So much so, I mean, think of the dogs with the human faces. Like, Freddy enters the real world and then takes over a giant boiler room or power plant as his castle. Like, it's just like, what? Why? None of it made sense. There's no logic, really, the second half of this movie, and it kind of just falls. And so Freddy's killed with a kiss at the end. Like, there's nothing really I can say other than that's weird, and just does not stick the landing. But all of a sudden, and just to give an idea, like, this ranked, score wise out of 100, this got like a 44 out of 100. So from here, we're going to jump all the way up, and the next film got 64. So a 20-point jump in the rankings, and that was part four. Also ranked at number 4, which is The Dream Master. Now, I was actually reading on Reddit because I was just curious where my rankings, coincide with other rankings, and this was a lot of people's favorite movie, and I can understand why. Um, they Well, let's start with what was bad about it. What was bad about part 4 was the entire first half of part 4. You took a ripped off intro of part 3 and you just reshot it and slapped on part 4. You took all the characters that people liked from part 3 and you just off them in the first act right away. And then you replace them with really cliche, annoying, dull characters. So if you liked part 3, which I liked part 3, I haven't seen it on this list yet, so it means it ranked higher. All of a sudden, it kind of kills off everything you liked about part 3 for no reason. It's not like they couldn't get the actors back. Uh, you know, they just didn't want them. It doesn't make sense why you'd build up this great storyline in part 3 and then throw it all away in the first act in part 4 to replace it with stuff that's not as good. But then here's where it gets better. All of a sudden, you have a really good final girl in Alice, and it subverts your expectations because you think it's going to be the final girl from part 3. But well, when they get rid of her, I would say spoiler, but this film's been on for like 30 years. So they ditched the final girl from part 3. They off her, and then she transfers her power over to Alice. And I actually really, really, really like the evolution, the arc, and the growth of the character Alice in this movie. That's why it was so disappointing to see how they portrayed Alice in part 5. Alice in part 4 is really, really good. Also, you have a great Freddy in this. Probably one of the best, probably the second best. I will say that. No spoilers on when I do that list. But one of the best Freddys in this, one of the best final girls in this. So the third act absolutely lands it. But there were some other things that were just like the dog pee bringing Freddy back to life. That's we couldn't come up with anything better than that. This was a very stylistic movie. I believe the director is Rennie Harlin. Pretty sure you will see like he for some reason loved neon green lights, and you will see neon green lighting in almost every scene of this movie. And it's so bad that sometimes you'll even see the light tubes just in the shot. I don't know why. Do just like neon green lights. But yeah, this is okay. It was fun. It was fun to watch, but I wouldn't put it in my top 3. But now let's get into the top 3 with A New Nightmare. Um, what a unique approach to the slasher genre. I mean, the thing that I love about Nightmare is its foundation was a unique approach to slasher of a antagonist that only exists in the dreamscape. And after how many sequels? So that two, three, four, five, and six. So after 5 sequels, you have Wes Craven returning to the franchise to do something different, which is to create a meta commentary on the slasher genre. This is pre-Scream, of course, by bringing that character or the ethos of that character into the real world, impacting the filmmakers of that movie. So Heather Langenkamp returns, but as Heather Langenkamp. Wes Craven is in the movie. Robert Shea is in the movie, and it was so well set up and such a great idea in how they on how they were kind of piecing this together. So where did it struggle? Well, it struggled um in just a few areas. One, Heather Langenkamp as herself, they really didn't portray her that well. They kind of made her mean and off-putting and just not that likable as a person. I don't know if that's how she is in real life, or that's how she wanted to play herself, but it doesn't make sense. Why is your lead actress so unlikable? And so like she's like rude to people in the movie. And I thought that was kind of a strange choice. It's not a very like slasher heavy slasher, and I don't know if how intentional that was, but not a lot happens in the slasher department really until the third act. And then when you hit the third act, it's really slow. The whole like Heather and her son going into the I don't know if it's hell, but like this other dimension to battle the entity that is known as Freddy. It's just slow. It just takes a while to really wrap up at the end. And it's just like at that point, like you built up this really interesting thing and it doesn't have the impact and the ending that you hoped. They had these really great practical effects, but they homogenized it with pretty poor CGI that dates the movie. Um, outside of the Heather character, there's no one else really in the movie. Heather and her son. And by the way, the actor who played the son is outstanding. He's probably the highlight of the movie. I did like the Freddy concept, but I didn't like how they changed his look and appearance so much that it wasn't true to how we kind of picture Freddy. So I wasn't all up on the aesthetic, but it was a really good movie and it had a lot more potential than I think that they gave it opportunity for. I think what would have made this more interesting is if they would have integrated the filmmaker so much more into this as opposed to just focusing on Heather Langenkamp, which didn't really work as well with how she portrayed herself. But that's splitting hairs. This was still a fun movie to watch and rewatch. All right, top 2. Number 2, Dream Warriors. I mean, I there's so much I like about Dream Warriors. They once again, after Freddy's Revenge, which was divisive to say the least, they had to bring things back. And they do so by creating kind of a comic book approach to battling Freddy. And I like that. I think it's fun. I think it was fresh and original. I like that they brought back the Nancy character as kind of like a mentor, a Yoda to Kristen's character and the rest of the Dream Warriors. This has a really, really good Freddy in it. The kill scenes are inventive. The special effects, the practical effects are mind-blowing that still absolutely hold up to this day. Um, it's just the originality is there. This is a fun movie to watch and rewatch. Absolutely had a great time on this one. And that brings us in. And I mean, you had to see this coming, which is the OG. Now, the reason the OG still ranks as the best, and just to get like, there was only 4 points separating Dream Warriors from the original, and here's where the original steps up. Number 1, it is one of the most original slasher films ever created. Number 2, the scenes in it are so iconic that they are still seen as some of the most inventive slasher scenes in any franchise. That's from the original. Um, you have Heather Langenkamp playing Nancy for the first time, and such a great storyline for Nancy. The character development in this movie is the best character development in any of the movies. You know who these characters are. You know Glenn, you know Rod, you know Tina, and you know Nancy. And you know them very quickly because of effective screenwriting, effective directing, and really effective acting. This is such a well put together movie where so many other studios were rushing to put out cheap, formulaic slasher films. A lot of attention was put into this one. The practical effects are so good. And what's so fascinating about this is I watched this one side by side with the remake. The effects in the 1984 are light years ahead of the effects in the 2010 remake. The fact that they took all these iconic scenes and tried to recreate it with CGI, like Freddy coming through the wallpaper, looming over the Nancy character. The original scene from the 84 movie is so good how they did that. It looks so scary. The remake, it just looked like a video game CGI. The scene of Tina being dragged up to the ceiling in the original versus I'm blanking on what they renamed her as in the remake. All of a sudden, like, you have something that is scary and you were not expecting it. And in the remake, it's quick cuts and, you know, it was done so poorly and ineffectively. And then when you see the original, you're like, yes, this is why that was so scary. Glenn being pulled into the bed. There's so many things about this that just you remember and it sticks with you. It has a strong stickiness factor and a stability factor in your mind. It was such a fun rewatch. And there's a reason that this OG film spawned all the sequels it did. Not to hold back. There's the TV series, comics, books. I mean, there's a reason that this movie created such a industry transforming um, foundation for New Line Cinema and all the movies that came thereafter. So there it is. All the Nightmare on Elm Street films ranked from worst to best. I'm curious how different your rankings are. I'm guessing a handful of you wanted and would prefer to see Dream Master in the top 3. And I'm sorry. There was, as a Dream Warriors fan, I struggled putting Dream Master up a little bit higher, but I want to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. I do plan to do some other videos on ranking the Freddys in this and ranking the final girls in these movies as well. So let me know if you're interested in those videos. As always, appreciate your subscriptions, for sharing this video with a friend, and we'll catch you all in the next screening. Take care, everyone.